Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Be For Real #Leaders Matter. I'm Dr. E. Michelle Mickens. I'm the CEO of Live for Change. Live for Change is a Christian-based global strategic leadership development consultancy. That's a mouthful, I know. And what we primarily do is bring transformational change into the lives of the leader and the organization. And there's several ways that we accomplish this. Through the Be For Real, REAL is an acronym, and it stands for Reliable, Ethical, Authentic Learner. And through this Be For Real leadership series, it's our trademark, we provide consulting services, coaching services, we do workshops, and various training programs that's designed to help build that leader. We work with you where you are, whether you are an emerging leader, whether you are an established leader, but we look at where you are and we have the conversation about where you desire to be, and we create a plan of action that will guide you to that place. And so today, through this particular episode, I just thought we would talk a little bit more about crisis leadership. And as a matter of fact, I have my notes here because I don't want to veer off. But one of the things that I wanted to talk about was how, since we are practicing social distancing, right? And how we are so concerned, especially when it comes to leading a team virtually. There are so many things that we want to engage in, if you will. We want to keep the engagement. We want to get feedback from our employees. We want to exercise emotional intelligence and social intelligence, which means that we are really being more empathetic. In times like these, that's necessary. And so as we're trying to hammer out and fine tune, the rules, if you will, the way that we're going to conduct business, if we're even able to do that, we want to make sure that we're asking our employees how they're doing and listen to them. Give them an opportunity to share from, whether it's at least weekly, but maybe day to day, how they're feeling. Because some adjust very well to working at home and, that's not an issue. Others are still trying to figure out what to do. They have families that are stuck at home. They may be able to do it if it was just them, but now they're also trying to manage their children, and they have a husband or, they have a wife, and they're still trying to figure out how do we all work together for more than just a few hours. So ask your team, how are you doing? How are you adjusting? Have those conversations. But then my conversation is with you as a leader, because this is a different ball of wax. It's one thing when you take some time off, which should be a part of your practice, and just spend time alone, readjusting and re-examining where you are as a leader and if you're on track leading your team. Well, now we are in a space where we are pretty much forced to isolate ourselves. And I know for many people, you feel like you are enduring solitary confinement. Well, today's topic is really solitary refinement instead of confinement, because mindset is everything. And it's very easy for us to become anxious, for us to deal with the whole FUDS factor. And many of you all who follow me, you know that I talk about the FUDS syndrome all the time. That's fear, uncertainty, and doubt. And so you are dealing with the uncertainties. And when you are forced to isolate, not only do you have a team, many of you all have a team, and then I know that there are some who are solopreneurs and you don't have a team that you have to look out for. But nevertheless, no matter what side of the coin you stand on, you still have to deal with self. I think it was last week, if not the week before, I talked about the importance of self-leadership. And so kind of adding to that, let this be perhaps a part 2 as we talk about solitary refinement, We are dealing with a crucible situation. And I use that word intentionally because crucible has to do with being in the fire. When you're in the fire, of course, it's uncomfortable, right? And there's a pressure that occurs. But this is the thing that I like about, if you can like the crucible, I want to share this with you and I want to read it correctly. As I mentioned, the crucible is a place of refinement, it's a place of testing. So what's in you is usually going to come out in a situation of adversity, in the situation of a crisis. What's truly in you will come out. And so if you have a tendency to be a very balanced, even keel, not easily disturbed person, if that makes sense, if you come from a place of peace most of the time, and that's something that you practice, if you come from a place of peace, then even in the midst of chaos and craziness, you can maintain that peace. But I mentioned just a second ago that peace has to be practiced. And that's a characteristic, that's a character that has to be built up in you. And one way of doing that is looking at the spiritual aspect of who you are, because, we are more than just, of course, this, we're more than just body. We're mind, soul, spirit. And in our soul, we have the mind, the will, the emotions that's contained in the soul of who we are. And then, of course, we have the spiritual aspect. And often, depending on your daily habits and your routines, the spiritual aspect can easily be neglected. And it's that spiritual component that makes all the difference. It brings the balance into your life. And when you're talking about building your character so that the best of you rises to the surface in the midst of turmoil, in the midst of despair, you really want to build that spiritual aspect. So we're going to talk a little bit about the spiritual side, as well as we are going to look at isolation and refinement. So I was talking about the crucible. It's an instrument of refining, such as the cross, the crucifix. That's one analogy that you can relate to, or at least understand the severity of it, right? It's a situation of severe trial. This is the part. Leading to the creation of something new. So what am I saying? In this space where we are forced to isolate and we are practicing social distancing, this is the best time in this crucible circumstance for us to refine ourselves and to look at what is the new self that's going to emerge. What is it that we can be doing to improve, enhance, and better ourselves so that we can again be effective leaders? How can we be more effective? So there are a couple of things, and we're just having a conversation. There are a couple of things that I want to share with you just as seeds and principles. One thing, I'm doing a lot more reading, and I pulled off my shelf this book. I don't know if you can see it. It's Strengthening the Soul of Your Leadership. Strengthening the Soul of Your Leadership. And Ruth Haley Barton is the author of this book. This is one of the books that I read when I was studying and working on my doctorate's degree. And in the book, so many wonderful nuggets about how lonely it is. We hear this all the time, it's lonely at the top. And she references how lonely Moses must have been trying to lead hundreds of thousands of Israelites. And he had to admit that he couldn't do it by himself, that this was too much of a burden to bear. But it took him having to admit to it and asking for help. So that's something to keep in mind. Are you able to ask for help? Are you able to seek help? Are you able to get the support that you need to stay strong or to get strong in this crisis, crucible situation that we're dealing with? Because whether it's a coronavirus or some other form of adversity, we need support. We need help. But I want to read something to you that struck me as being very pertinent. She says this and this is talking about loneliness. This in itself is no small thing, for allowing ourselves to face our ultimate aloneness compels us to travel inward, as Moses did, to meet ourselves and to meet the infinite love and riches of God dwelling inside our beings. Then and only then can our loneliness be transformed into a fruitful solitude in which the fullness of God's presence fills all emptiness. So I was asking you earlier, what do you do? What are your practices? What are your routines? And if you are not spending, and I mentioned early on that this is a Christian-based organization. This is a Christian-based consultancy. And so periodically you will hear me share about the Word of God, because that is part of my daily practice, spending time in His presence. If you neglect that spiritual piece, or you're not feeding it frequently, then you find yourself, you will falter. You will falter. And many people have various religious practices. Mine is Christianity. And spending time in prayer, spending time in the presence of God strengthens my inner self, because there's an inward part that longs to be heard and to be nurtured. And it truly comes out some kind of way. So if we underserve that inner part, then there's something missing in how we relate to other people. But if we feed that inner part, then when we are even alone, we don't have to feel lonely, because we know how to engage in a relationship with the Lord. And so that's very important. And we'll also know how to help other people when they're dealing with that feeling of anxiety and feeling alone, because loneliness can create anxiety. Uncertainty creates lots of anxiety. So how we deal with that is more than just coping, because often when you cope with something, you find temporary ways to satisfy a long-term concern or a long-term issue. I mean, let's be honest. Most of us, when we found out, at least here in Northwest Ohio, or I should say in Ohio, May 1st is now the potential deadline or goal, I should say, for us to be able to resume whatever normal life is. And that's another month, right? Practically another month of us practicing this new skill of social distancing and, being at home, staying home. That in and of itself can be challenging even for an introvert like me. I'm used to being alone. I live alone. I work alone. And the danger, if you will, in that is spending too much time alone. So it's one thing to have the option of going out and being about. I used to make myself, if I didn't already have appointments and wasn't going to be out, I would make myself get out and talk to people and intermingle, just because I know that you can get caught up in your own world. Well, when you're told that that option is not available to you, it puts you in a different headspace. At least it did for me. I mean, even on as recent as yesterday, and I don't know when you'll see this video, but it was just a beautiful day. It was like 60 something degrees, April 2nd, 2020. And I went to our metro park, was able to do a little recording, walking, doing some of the things, re-engaging in some of the things that I would do anyway on a good day, on a, warm day or a sunny day. And so just to be able to reconnect in that way meant a lot to me. But what was interesting was it was extremely crowded. I did go later in the day. I used to go early in the morning, so I was waiting for the temperature to rise up. So that was part of the challenge. But it was extremely crowded. And, of course, I was reminded that everybody's bringing their families to the parks. So the park that I love to frequent was nevertheless crowded. And as I was crossing paths with someone, we both didn't want to jump off the path because we would jump into, all of the shrubbery and what have you. So we were both walking quickly past each other, glancing at each other. And I just thought, there was a time when we could walk, jog, whatever, and still greet each other and not have to, worry about running the other person off of this path. But I was thinking about, I need to be distant from her. And she had this look like, oh my God, so it was just a weird feeling. And it happened in seconds. I mean, by the time I finished processing it, we had already passed each other. But just the mere fact that change has really left an indelible impact in my life. I had to regroup and remind myself that, this is a temporary situation. And I had to rely on my long-term practices of being at peace, knowing where to turn to, who to turn to, that will put me back in the right headspace. So I know I'm doing a lot, but I just thought I would take a little bit of time to kind of challenge you, if you will, into thinking about how you're building that spiritual piece, that spiritual part of yourself, because it is so critical, especially in times like these. So something else I wanted to share with you. I mentioned the FUDS factor. I will make sure in the description below that you will have access to my free tools. I have some free leadership tools and resources that I believe is going to help you in this time that we're dealing with, in the crisis. And so I want to offer it. I wanted to show you what that would look like. Offer you an opportunity to take advantage of it. It's a real simple process. All you need to do is basically submit your email address and your name, and you'll get access to that tool through an email that would come back to you. So here it is. In these uncertain times, you really want to have access to this information. And it's just a list of various articles. As a matter of fact, let me just show you some of the things that's in there, because I don't want to spend a lot of time trying to pull it up. But I'll make sure that the link is available in the description bar. One of the things that's available to you is getting the FUDS, Fear, Uncertainty, and Doubt, Bust the FUDS audio digital series. And so one of the things that's part of that particular series is the workbook. And the workbook is just chock full of information. It's an interactive workbook that flows with the audio component. Within the workbook, there are a couple of templates. One has to do with scenario planning for the bust of the FUDS. How do you go through, and this is really a good time to start thinking about various scenarios. I heard a pastor say recently how it's difficult for CEOs to plan in a crisis. And I beg to differ. I think that that's the best time to plan. You may have to revisit the plans that you have, but if you already operate using a strategic plan, this is the best time to revisit the strategic plan with your teams. You can do it virtually and spend some time looking at various scenarios as it pertains to where you are right now, what's happening in your industry, as best as you're able to gather that information. And then what are at least 3 different potential opportunities for you guys to make adjustments. That's what planning is all about. Planning has to be fluid, but you absolutely want to spend some time planning. So getting the Bust the Fuds series, audio series, is about 10 little mini sessions. Again, interactive with the workbook. The workbook I try to make as simple as possible. The goal is not to have anything very complicated, but to help you think past fear, uncertainty, and doubt. What are some of the basic steps that you can do? One of the free tools that you'll get in the free tool kit that I mentioned earlier and the resource guide, you'll get this. This is in the workbook, but you'll also get this free template. Because one thing that I encourage you to do is start, as we're talking about, the crucible and looking at ourselves and looking inward, ways to refine ourselves. Look at your strengths. Look at your weaknesses, your opportunities, your threats. Not just look at them, but list them. And really spend some time, prayer, in the presence of God, looking at your skill sets, looking at areas in which you need to retool. You're hearing retool and upskill. What is it? Reskill, upskill. Do that. Spend time doing, listing those things out. All of these pieces work together, but it begins with looking at yourself. I also have a 30-day journal. I mean, this is my copy, but in this journal, you have the opportunity to look at and face fear face to face. What is triggering these fears that I have? What is it that keeps rising, keeps resurfacing, that I need to work on, that I need to address instead of trying to hide? Leaders have a tendency to demonstrate this false sense of pride, false sense of having this power, because we think that we look weak if we admit our weaknesses and our shortcomings and things that causes us fear and anxiety. But that is, one of those things that's furthest from the truth. One day, I have here, be still. Be still. Choose to see what happens instead of speculating what might happen. What does being still look like or feel like for you? Choose to see what happens instead of speculating what happens. Be still. You have the ability to actually control how you respond to your day. So seeing what happens can be dictated by you. You don't know all the details. We don't know all the details of how one day, from the next day, what those details may be. But we can control how we respond to them. I mentioned a lot earlier about how you can come from a place of peace in the midst of chaos. The way you get there, you start by being still. And I use this particular scripture: fear not, stand firm, see God perform today. Just be still. That's taken from Exodus 14:13 through 14. And in this particular 30-day journal, some has scripture. Some of the days have scriptures in it, and other days quotes. But the whole purpose is to help you hone in on the challenges that you're dealing with and think through the process instead of trying to skirt it under, a rug, ignore it, or self-medicate. No, let's address them. And this is the time. This is the perfect time. While we're dealing with solitary refinement, let's get our tools. Bust the Fuds is one of the tools that's listed inside of the free tool guide and resources. There's access to various videos and blogs and just information that's going to help build you up. One other thing that I want to share with you, and I hope that you guys are cool. Again, I'm just basically having a conversation of how to lead in a crisis. So I'm hoping that these nuggets are going to be beneficial to you. I've talked about in the past the importance of being an agile leader. And I want to share something that I posted back in June the 20th of last year about agility. An agile organizational leader invests in preparedness and is ready for uncertainty. What's your plan for possible global disruption? And clearly, I had no idea. Are you ready? Do you have a risk management plan? And then I just kind of go on to say when agility is intentional, an organization is positioned to overcome uncertainty. So the whole point of that is looking at yourself. How agile are you? And how agile, and you can look at the circumstances that you're dealing with right now. Were you agile? Was your organization agile? Were you able to quickly make some adjustments to keep things moving forward? Of course, everyone was taken aback with the suddenness of how quickly people were told to, stay at home. I forgot the exact term, but to stay at home, to work remotely if you can, to, not have these direct contact with anyone. Some organizations, because they already had some things in place, some rules about how to work remotely, that didn't throw them off. So they were able to quickly adjust to that. But how about you? Were you able to quickly make some of those changes? Have you done it yet? Because I also know that some people are just beside themselves. Do you need help? It's okay to get the help. And that's one of the things that I do. Live for Change. We are also a leadership development consultancy. So we will sit down and help you create a plan of action that's going to be feasible for you, your organization, just for you, whatever it takes to get you on a path that's going to help you get out of your head, help you get out of your way, and to help you keep moving things forward. In my book, When Purpose Exceeds Profits, one of the things that I want to mention, and then I'll go ahead and move on. I talk about adaptability. So I just talked about being agile, and having an adaptable organization is important as well. And I'm just going to read a little piece here. It says, leaders have the awesome responsibility of knowing how to anticipate and manage change. Change occurs externally as well as internally. So it happens to leaders and it happens in the organization. Leaders must be keenly aware of these changes, especially as it pertains to themselves. And as important as this process is, it rarely happens because the leader does not take time for self-reflection and assessment. Self-reflection and self-assessment need to be done on a regular basis as a means of ensuring that leadership behaviors, values, and beliefs are in alignment with the organization's value system. I put that as a key principle in my book, When Purpose Exceeds Profits. This is not a very thick book, but it is a wonderful leadership guide. This is a leadership development guide that has many principles in it to help you think about what should be my next step. There's information in here about how to be a global leader, because often we step into these roles and there are great expectations, especially if you do well and you you are an agile person, there are some assumptions made about, oh, you should be able to do this well, or you should be able to do this like so-and-so did it. And that doesn't help. So here I have ways to self-assess. I have markers everywhere. Ways for you to self-assess. Ways for you to learn some key principles about being a global leader and leading your teams, internationally. There's information about being an authentic leader. There's just so much information that I believe is going to help you. It talks about culture change, nuggets of information that you can have at your fingertips. That's part of the Bust the Fuds system. If you get the Bust the Fuds system, not only did I lower the price to make it as affordable as possible, because this is definitely not the time to try to take advantage of people and gouge, but this book is free as part of the system. I mentioned the 30-day guide, and then you get that audio piece. So all of that information I put in with the resource guide that I'm going to make sure you have access to. Simple tools, but the point of it all is get your tools. Use your tools. What do you already have that you may have been ignoring? This is the time for self-assessment as you go through your refinement, not confinement. I want you to be blessed. Again, I'm Dr. E. Michelle Mickens. Reach out to me. I'm here for you. I thank you for your time, and I hope you have a phenomenal day. You can. That's something you can choose to do. No matter what space you're in, you can have control over how you respond. Let's make this next 30 days, this next period and space that we're in, let's make it awesome by choice. Let's be intentional as we refine ourselves. Be blessed. Take care.